It was a sweltering Tuesday afternoon when the screams started, guttural, inhuman, echoing from a locked office in Mineral Wells Veterans Affairs building. 4 months after Pamela Allen's body hit the Baker Hotel steps, I thought I'd seen the worst this town could offer. But as I stood in that cold, whispering hallway, staring at a man who'd just stabbed his own hand and gasped, "He's coming," I realized Mineral Wells' secrets were just getting started. Mineral Wells, Texas, is a place that gets under your skin, whether you want it to or not. 5 years ago, when I pinned on my badge as a rookie cop in this town of 16,000, I thought I was ready for anything. It's a small community, 50 miles west of Fort Worth, where the folks are salt of the earth, God-fearing, hard-working, the kind who'd pull over to help with a flat tire, no questions asked. But there's an edge to Mineral Wells, a shadow that creeps in after dark when the streets go quiet and the air feels heavier than it should. It's north of interesting, south of scary as shit, and the longer you stay, the more you realize the past here isn't just history. It's alive, whispering in the corners, watching from the shadows. I learned that the hard way, first with Pamela Allen's death at the Baker Hotel, and then, 4 months later, with a call that shook me to my core at the Veterans Affairs building on Southeast 6th Avenue. I've shared the Baker Hotel story before, how I found Pamela, 29, sprawled naked on the red brick steps, her body broken from a fall off the 7th floor, her last words about needing to meet Virginia. That night, a month into my job, changed how I see this town. The investigation was quick, too quick, labeling it a suicide or drunken accident, but the questions, why she was naked, why her clothes were folded, who Virginia was, stuck with me. Digging at the Historical Society, I found Virginia Brown, a woman from the 1940s who jumped from the Baker's 13th floor, her ghost tied to room 714, the same floor where Pamela fell. It was like the hotel itself was holding on to something, pulling people into its past. That case left me uneasy, but it was just the start. Mineral Wells had more secrets, and they weren't done with me yet. 4 months after Pamela's death, in the thick of a Texas summer, I got another call that made my blood run cold. It was a Tuesday around 2 p.m., and I was working a rare day shift, covering for the regular patrol. My partner, James Orr, a 15-year veteran with a gravelly voice and a no-nonsense attitude, was riding shotgun. James was born and raised in Mineral Wells. His roots sunk deep into the town's history, and he had a way of shrugging off its strangeness that I envied. We were cruising down Oak Avenue, the sun baking the asphalt, when the radio crackled. Unit 12, disturbance at the Veterans Affairs building, 300 Southeast 6th Avenue. Multiple callers reporting screams. Proceed with caution. James raised an eyebrow, setting his coffee in the cup holder. Screams in the middle of the day, he muttered. That's a new one. The VA building was a low, beige structure, unremarkable except for its location in a quiet part of town. It handled paperwork for veterans, benefits, medical claims, nothing that screamed trouble. But as we pulled into the parking lot, I saw a crowd gathered outside, maybe a dozen people, employees and a few veterans, their faces pale, their eyes wide. Some were whispering, others just staring at the building like it might bite. The heat was oppressive, the air thick with the smell of dust and asphalt. But what hit me hardest were the sounds coming from inside. Deep, guttural moans rolled through the open door, mixed with screams that didn't sound human. Raw, primal, like something torn from a nightmare. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, and for a fleeting moment, I wasn't sure it was either. My hand went to my holster, instinct kicking in, but my gut twisted with something else. Fear. James and I exchanged a look. He was calm, his jaw set, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "Let's move," he said, stepping out of the cruiser. I followed, my boots crunching on the gravel, the sounds from the building growing louder with every step. The crowd parted for us, their murmurs falling silent. A woman in a blazer, probably an office manager, grabbed my arm. "It's coming from the back office," she said, her voice shaking. We all got out, but it's not right. It's not normal. I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral, but her words echoed what I'd felt since Pamela's death. This town wasn't normal. We approached the entrance, the moans and screams now so loud they seemed to vibrate in my chest. The glass doors were propped open, and the air inside hit me like a slap. Cold, damp, impossible for a Texas summer, even with the AC cranked. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the quality of the air, heavy and cloying, like stepping into a cellar. I drew my pistol, James doing the same, and we moved into the foyer, our footsteps echoing on the linoleum. The lights flickered overhead, casting shadows that seemed to shift just out of sight. I'd cleared buildings before, but this felt different, like the building itself was watching us. The foyer was empty, desks abandoned, papers scattered like someone had left in a hurry. The screams were coming from the back, down a long hallway lined with offices. But there was something else. Whispers, faint and indistinct, like voices murmuring just beyond the walls. I froze, my grip tightening on my gun. "You hear that?" I asked James, my voice low. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the hallway. "Focus, kid," he said, but his voice was tighter than usual. We cleared the side rooms quickly, finding nothing but empty chairs and humming computers. The employees had all made it out, thank God, but the sounds were louder now, coming from a door at the end of the hall. As we approached, I noticed something else. The whispers seemed to move with us, not just from the office, but from the walls, the ceiling, like they were circling us. I told myself it was the acoustics, the moans bouncing off the concrete, but deep down I wasn't sure. My mind flashed to the Baker Hotel, to the way the air felt heavy that night, the creak of the building like it was alive. This was different, but familiar, like mineral wells had a signature, a coldness that wasn't just temperature, a weight that wasn't just air. The door was locked, a cheap metal handle that looked like it hadn't been replaced since the building was new. The screams were deafening now, mixed with words I couldn't make out, a low, guttural chant that made my skin crawl. James banged on the door, shouting, "Mineral wells! PD, open up!" No response, just more moans, more screams. I glanced at him, and he gave a curt nod. He was bigger than me, built like a linebacker. So he took the lead, stepping back and driving his boot into the door. The frame splintered, and the door flew inward, slamming against the wall with a crash. For a split second, I saw something that didn't make sense. A man stood in the office, but he wasn't right. He was wearing a long, white doctor's coat, a surgical mask covering his mouth, his eyes hidden in shadow. The image burned into my brain, sharp and vivid, like a photograph. Then I blinked, and it was gone. Instead, there was an older man, maybe in his 60s, in green fatigues, his face pale, his sparse hair sticking out like he'd been shocked. He held a letter opener, one of those dull, oversized ones you get from a civic club, and he was waving it wildly, his eyes wide with terror. He was babbling, his voice a mix of moans and broken words. Not the water again, not the water. It's cold, so cold, it's time for your treatment. I'm a better boy, so much better. I won't run, James shouted. Drop it. We both raised our guns, training them on him. The man didn't seem to hear. He moved fast, too fast for his age, and before I could react, he slammed his palm onto the desk and drove the letter opener through the back of his hand, pinning it to the wood with a sickening crunch. Blood pooled on the desk, and he looked straight at us, his eyes cold and wide, like he was seeing something we couldn't. He's coming. He gasped and collapsed to the floor, his body limp. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, the room spinning. James cursed under his breath and ran for the paramedics, leaving me with the man. I knelt beside him, checking his pulse, weak but there, and scanned the room. It was a standard office, a desk, a computer, files stacked haphazardly. But my eyes caught on a half-empty box of mineral water bottles in the corner, labeled Crazy Minerals Company, Mineral Wells, Texas. On impulse, I grabbed one and shoved it in my pocket, the glass cool against my fingers. The whispers were gone now, the air still cold, but quieter, like the building had exhaled. The paramedics arrived, stabilizing the man and wheeling him out. They said it looked like early dementia, maybe a psychotic break, but their faces were tight, like they didn't quite believe it. As we walked outside, James pointed to a small brass sign near the entrance I hadn't noticed before. Millings Sanitarium, National Register of Historic Places, Mineral Wells, Texas, 1929. The words hit me like a punch. This wasn't just a VA building, it was a sanitarium, another piece of Mineral Wells' past, tied to the same crazy water legacy as the Baker Hotel. That night, alone in my apartment, I couldn't shake the image of the man in the doctor's coat, the whispers in the walls, the old man's words about the water. It felt connected. Pamela's death, Virginia's ghost, this new incident, all tied to the town's history. I was a cop, trained to deal with facts, but Mineral Wells was teaching me that facts weren't enough. Something was wrong here, something bigger than one case, and I was determined to figure it out. The day at the Veterans Affairs building on Southeast 6th Avenue left a mark on me, one that didn't fade with the Texas sun. The image of that older man in green fatigues, his hand pinned to the desk by a letter opener, his eyes wide with terror as he gasped, "He's coming," played on a loop in my mind. The screams, the whispers in the walls, the cold, damp air. It was all too much like the night I found Pamela Allen's body at the Baker Hotel 4 months earlier. That case had opened my eyes to Mineral Wells' strangeness, with its talk of Virginia Brown's ghost and the crazy water wells that built the town. Now, standing outside the VA building, staring at a brass sign that read, Millings Sanitarium, National Register of Historic Places, Mineral Wells, Texas, 1929. I knew I'd stumbled onto another piece of the puzzle. This town, 50 miles west of Fort Worth, wasn't just haunted by its past, it was drowning in it. I've been a cop here for 5 years, long enough to know that Mineral Wells doesn't give up its secrets easily. The locals, good folks who'd share their last dollar, clam up when you ask about certain places. The Baker Hotel, the old wells, and now, it seemed, the building that used to be the Millings Sanitarium. My partner, James Orr, a 15-year veteran born and raised in this town, had shrugged off the VA incident as just mineral wells being mineral wells, but I saw the way his hands gripped the steering wheel as we drove away. The bottle of crazy minerals, company water I'd pocketed from the office, sat heavy in my jacket, its label a reminder of the old man's words. Not the water again. It's cold. So cold. I needed to know what it meant and why a sanitarium from 1929 was tied to a disturbance in 2025. A week after the incident, on my day off, I headed back to the Mineral Wells Historical Society. I'd been there before, digging into the Baker Hotel after Pamela's death, and the musty smell of old paper was starting to feel familiar. The Historical Society, a squat brick building behind the county library, was a treasure trove of the town's past, its shelves crammed with ledgers, newspapers, and pamphlets that told stories no one wanted to say out loud. Mrs. Carter, the volunteer with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous smile, greeted me like she'd been expecting me. "Back again, officer," she said, her voice polite but wary. I nodded, keeping my cards close. "Heard the VA building used to be a sanitarium," I said. Figured I'd learn more about it. Her smile tightened and she adjusted her glasses. "The Millings Sanitarium," she said softly. "That's a dark chapter. Be careful what you stir up." She led me to a corner of the room where the sanitarium's records were kept, a dusty collection of files and bound books that smelled of mildew and time. As I settled into a creaky chair, I couldn't shake the feeling that the town was watching, its secrets encoded in the yellowed pages before me. Mineral Wells wasn't just a place, it was a living thing, its pulse tied to the mineral wells that had drawn people here for over a century. To understand the VA incident, I had to go back to the beginning, to the crazy water that built the town and the sanitarium that became its shadow. Mineral wells began in 1881 when James Alvis Lynch dug a well that changed everything. The water tasted strange, sharp with minerals, but Lynch swore it cured his rheumatism, and his wife claimed it eased her arthritis. In an era when medicine was more prayer than science, that was enough to spark a frenzy. By the early 1900s, Mineral Wells was the South's premier health resort, its streets lined with bathhouses, spas, and hotels like the Baker, all promising miracles from the mineral-rich water. The third well, dubbed the Crazy Water Well, became legendary after a woman with dementia drank from it and reportedly regained her mind. The name Crazy Water stuck, a half-joking nod to the hope it inspired. Bottles of it were shipped nationwide, and the town thrived, drawing the sick, the desperate, and the curious. But hope has a dark side, and Mineral Wells saw plenty of it. The visitors weren't just tourists. They were the dying, the broken, people who spent their last dime on a train ticket to drink from the wells. Many never left, their names etched in the town cemeteries or lost in the records of places like the Millings Sanitarium. Opened in 1929, the same year as the Baker Hotel, the sanitarium was built to capitalize on the crazy water craze, catering to those whose ailments weren't just physical, but mental. Schizophrenia, hysteria, dementia. Patients came from across the country, lured by promises that the mineral water, combined with innovative treatments, could cure their minds. The sanitarium was a sprawling complex then, its whitewashed walls and manicured lawns a stark contrast to the suffering inside. I found a faded brochure from 1930. its cover showing smiling nurses and patients drinking from glass bottles labeled crazy water. The text boasted of hydrotherapy and mineral-based regimens, claiming the water's unique properties could rebalance the mind. But as I dug deeper, the picture darkened. Newspaper clippings from the 1930s told of patients who died under mysterious circumstances, some during water immersion treatments, others after violent outbursts. A 1934 article mentioned a man who stabbed himself with a penknife, raving about the doctor in cold water before being restrained. The parallels to the VA incident made my stomach churn. The man I'd seen babbling about the water and treatments had acted like he was reliving something from decades ago. The sanitarium's records were spotty, many destroyed or lost when it closed in the 1950s. But a patient log from 1932 listed dozens of names, some marked with cryptic notes. Unresponsive to hydrotherapy, reports visions, transferred to state asylum. One entry caught my eye. A woman named Clara Hensley, admitted for melancholia, who claimed a man in a white coat told her to drink more water even when it made her sick. She died a month later, cause of death listed as heart failure. I thought of the figure I'd seen in the VA office, the fleeting image of a doctor in a white coat and mask, gone in a blink. Was it my imagination, or was the sanitarium's past bleeding into the present? Mrs. Carter hovered nearby, pretending to organize papers but watching me closely. I asked her about the sanitarium's closure. She hesitated, then said, "It wasn't just money troubles. People said the place was wrong. Patients saw things, heard things. Nurses quit, saying the halls felt alive. When it became the VA in the 60s, folks thought it'd be different, but the stories never stopped." She lowered her voice. "Some say the water's to blame, not just the wells, but what it carries. Old pain, old anger." Her words sent a chill through me, not just because of the VA incident, but because of the Baker Hotel. Both places were built on the crazy water, both promised healing, and both left behind stories of ghosts and madness. The Baker had Virginia Brown, the lady in red, haunting room 714. Did the sanitarium have its own spectre, tied to the water that flowed through its pipes? I found a clipping from 1975, when the VA building was already in use, describing a janitor who quit after hearing screams from an empty ward. He claimed the air was cold as a grave and swore he saw a figure in a white coat watching him. The article dismissed it as superstition, but I wasn't so sure. I kept digging, pulling out a maintenance log from the sanitarium's final years. It listed repairs to the hydrotherapy rooms, where patients were submerged in mineral water for hours, sometimes restrained. The log noted persistent leaks in the basement where the water was stored, and unexplained temperature drops in the treatment wards. One entry, dated 1951, read, "Staff reports voices in Ward C. Water tanks drained. No effect." I thought of the whispers in the VA building, the cold air that didn't belong. Was it just a draft or something more? The crazy water itself was a constant thread. The crazy minerals company, still bottling it today, traced its roots to the town's early wells. I found an old advertisement claiming the water's minerals, lithium, magnesium, and others, could soothe the nerves and restore balance. But a 1940s medical report, buried in the Historical Society's files, warned of side effects, hallucinations, agitation, even psychosis in rare cases. The report was ignored, the water too profitable to question. I thought of the bottle in my pocket, its label promising authentic mineral wells wellness. Had the old man at the VA been drinking it? Was it just a coincidence, or was the water more than it seemed? As I left the Historical Society, the sky was turning grey, a storm brewing over the hills. Mrs. Carter stopped me at the door, her hand on my arm. "You're not the first to ask about the sanitarium," she said. "Just be careful. Some things don't like being looked at." I nodded, but her warning followed me to my truck, heavy as the bottle in my pocket. Mineral Wells wasn't just a town built on hope. It was a graveyard of broken dreams, its wells tapping into something deeper than minerals. The Baker Hotel had shown me that, with Pamela's death and Virginia's ghost. Now, the Millings Sanitarium was telling its own story, one of cold water, lost minds, and a past that refused to stay buried. Driving home, I passed the VA building, its beige facade innocent in the daylight, but I couldn't unsee the old man's face or unhear his words about the water and treatments. The sanitarium's history was a mirror to the Bakers, both tied to the crazy water that promised miracles, but delivered something else. I didn't know what yet, but I was starting to think the water wasn't just a gimmick. It was a key to the town's secrets, and maybe to what happened in that locked office. The call came in at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of sweltering Texas summer day that makes you wish you'd never left the air-conditioned cruiser. I was 4 months into my 5th year as a cop in Mineral Wells, Texas, a town that's taught me more about shadows than I ever wanted to know. My partner, James Orr, a 15-year veteran with a face carved from granite and a laugh that could fill a room, was riding shotgun, sipping coffee that smelled like it had been brewed in a sock. We were covering a day shift, a rare switch from our usual night patrol, and the streets of Mineral Wells were quiet, too quiet, the way they get when the town's holding its breath. I'd been on edge since the Baker Hotel incident 4 months earlier, when I found Pamela Allen's body sprawled naked on the red brick steps, her cryptic mention of Virginia, leading me to a ghost story that still haunted my dreams. That case, with its ties to the crazy water wells and Virginia Brown's ledger entry for room 714, had cracked open something in Mineral Wells, and I wasn't sure I wanted to see what was inside. The radio snapped me out of my thoughts, the dispatcher's voice sharp and urgent. Unit 12, disturbance at the Veterans Affairs Building, 300 Southeast 6th Avenue. Multiple callers reporting screams. Proceed with caution. James set his coffee down, his eyebrow arching. "Screams at the VA," he said, his voice a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "That's not paperwork gone wrong." I nodded, my hand already on the wheel, turning us towards 6th Avenue. The VA was a low, beige building, the kind you drive past without a second glance. Government offices, fluorescent lights, stacks of forms for veterans' benefits. Nothing about it screamed trouble, but as we pulled into the parking lot, I felt a prickle at the back of my neck, the same unease I'd felt at the Baker Hotel. A crowd was gathered outside, maybe 15 people, office workers in blazers, a few veterans in ball caps, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on the building. Some were whispering, others just staring, like they'd seen something they couldn't unsee. The heat was brutal, the air thick with the smell of hot asphalt and dust. But what hit me hardest were the sounds coming from inside. Deep, guttural moans rolled out through the open glass doors, mixed with screams that didn't sound human, raw, jagged, like something being torn apart. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if it was either. My hand went to my holster, instinct taking over, but my gut twisted with a fear I couldn't name. It wasn't just the sounds, it was the way they felt, like they were clawing at the air, demanding to be heard. James and I stepped out of the cruiser, our boots crunching on the gravel. The crowd parted, their murmurs falling silent. A woman in a navy blazer, her badge identifying her as an office manager, grabbed my arm. "It's in the back office," she said, her voice trembling. "We don't know what's happening. Everyone got out, but it's not right." Her eyes darted to the building, and I followed her gaze. The VA looked ordinary, its windows reflecting the afternoon sun. But those sounds told a different story. I nodded, trying to keep my face calm, but her words echoed what I'd felt since Pamela's death. This town wasn't right. We approached the entrance, the moans and screams growing louder, vibrating in my chest like a tuning fork. The glass doors were propped open, and the air inside hit me like a wall. Cold, damp, impossible for a Texas summer, even with the AC on full blast. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the quality of the air, heavy and cloying, like stepping into a crypt. I drew my pistol, James doing the same, and we moved into the foyer, our footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. The lights flickered overhead, casting shadows that seemed to shift just out of sight. I'd cleared buildings before, drunk fights, domestic calls, but this felt different, like the building itself was alive, watching her. The foyer was empty, desks abandoned, papers scattered across the floor like someone had bolted mid-task. A coffee mug lay shattered near a chair, its contents pooling on the tile. The screams were coming from the back, down a long hallway, lined with closed office doors. But there was something else, whispers, faint and indistinct, like voices murmuring just beyond the walls. I froze, my grip tightening on my gun. "You hear that?" I asked James, keeping my voice low. He nodded, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the hallway. "Stay sharp, kid," he said, but his voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. James was a rock, the kind of cop who'd seen it all, but even he felt it, the wrongness of this place. We cleared the side rooms first, moving quickly but carefully, our guns trained on every corner. The offices were empty, computers humming, phones off the hook, but the air grew colder the deeper we went, the whispers louder, like a chorus just out of reach. I couldn't make out words, but they felt urgent, almost pleading, like they were trying to tell me something. My mind flashed to the Baker Hotel, to the way the air felt heavy that night, the creak of the building like it was breathing. This was different, sharper, more immediate, but it carried the same weight, the same sense the mineral wells was hiding something. The screams were coming from a door at the end of the hall, a plain metal slab with a cheap handle. The moans were deafening now, mixed with broken words I could barely catch, something about water and cold. James banged on the door, his voice booming. "Mineral wells, PD, open the door." No response, just more screams, more moans, and that chant-like babbling that made my skin crawl. I glanced at James, and he gave a curt nod. He was bigger than me, built like a linebacker, so he took point, stepping back and driving his boot into the door just above the handle. The frame splintered, and the door flew inward, slamming against the wall with a crash that echoed down the hall. For a split second, I saw something, that didn't belong. A man stood in the office, but he wasn't right. He was tall, his frame draped in a long white doctor's coat, a surgical mask covering his mouth, his eyes hidden in shadow. The image was sharp, vivid, like a flashbulb going off in my brain. I blinked, and it was gone. In its place was an older man, maybe in his 60s, wearing green fatigues, his face pale as chalk, his sparse hair sticking out like he'd been electrified. His eyes were wide, wild with terror, and he was waving a letter opener, a dull, oversized one, the kind you'd get from the Rotary Club. He was babbling, his voice a mix of moans and broken phrases. Not the water again, not the water. It's cold, so cold. It's time for your treatment. I'm a better boy, so much better. I won't run, I won't. James shouted, drop it. And we both raised our guns, aiming at his chest. The man didn't seem to hear, his eyes locked on something we couldn't see. He moved fast, too fast for his age, and before I could react, he slammed his palm onto the desk beside him and drove the letter opener through the back of his hand, pinning it to the wood with a sickening crunch. Blood spurted, pooling on the desk, and he looked straight at us, his eyes cold and wide, like he was staring through us. He's coming, he gasped, his voice a ragged whisper, and then he collapsed, his body crumpling to the floor like a marionette with cut strings. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, the room spinning around me. The whispers were gone, the air still cold but silent, like the building had exhaled. James cursed, his voice shaking, and bolted for the door. Paramedics now, he yelled, his footsteps fading down the hall. I knelt beside the man, my training kicking in despite the shock. His pulse was weak, but there, his breathing shallow. Blood was still seeping from his hand, the letter opener glinting under the fluorescent lights. I scanned the room, trying to ground myself. It was a standard office, desk, computer, files stacked haphazardly. But my eyes caught on a half-empty box of mineral water bottles in the corner, labeled Crazy Minerals Company, Mineral Wells, Texas. The same water I'd seen advertised around town, tied to the wells that built mineral wells. On impulse, I grabbed a bottle and shoved it in my jacket pocket, the glass cool against my fingers. I did a final sweep of the room, checking for threats, but found nothing, just the desk, the blood, and that box of water. The cold air lingered, clinging to my skin, and I couldn't shake the image of the man in the doctor's coat. Had I imagined it? My mind went to Pamela Allen, to the way she'd acted before a fall, drawn to a window for no reason, talking about Virginia. This felt similar, like the old man was caught in something bigger, something tied to the building or to the water. James returned with the paramedics, who moved quickly, stabilizing the man and wheeling him out on a gurney. They said it looked like early dementia, maybe a psychotic break, but their faces were tight, like they didn't believe their own words. The crowd outside was still there, quieter now, watching as the ambulance pulled away. James and I walked back to the cruiser, the heat hitting us like a wave. And that's when he pointed to a small brass sign near the entrance. I hadn't noticed it before, but there it was, etched in faded letters. Millings Sanitarium, National Register of Historic Places, Mineral Wells, Texas, 1929. The words hit me like a punch. This wasn't just a VA building. It was a sanitarium, another relic of Mineral Wells past, tied to the same crazy water legacy as the Baker Hotel. We wrote up the report back at the station, but it felt hollow, like we were missing the real story. The old man's words, Not the water again. He's coming. Kept circling in my head, along with that vision of the doctor's coat. James was quieter than usual, his usual wisecracks replaced by a grim silence. "Weird shit," he said finally, lighting a cigarette despite the no smoking rule. "But it's mineral wells. What do you expect?" I wanted to press him, to ask if he'd seen anything strange, but something in his eyes told me to let it go. Not yet. That night, alone in my apartment, I pulled the crazy water bottle from my pocket and set it on the kitchen counter. It looked ordinary, just a glass bottle with a retro label, but it felt heavy, like it carried more than water. The VA incident was another thread in the web mineral. Wells had spun around me, tied to Pamela's death, to Virginia Brown, to the wells that promised healing but delivered something else. I didn't know what, but I was going to find out. The Veterans Affairs incident on Southeast 6th Avenue clung to me like damp air, refusing to let go. The image of that older man in green fatigues, his hand pinned to the desk by a letter opener, his voice rasping, "He's coming," was burned into my mind. The guttural screams, the whispers in the walls, the fleeting vision of a man in a white doctor's coat. It all felt too close to the night I found Pamela Allen's body at the Baker Hotel 4 months earlier. That case had pulled me into Mineral Wells' shadows, with its talk of Virginia Brown's ghost and the crazy water wells that built the town. Now, the VA building, revealed as the former Millings Sanitarium, was another thread in the web, tied to the same dark history. The bottle of crazy minerals company water I'd pocketed from the office sat on my kitchen counter, its label mocking me with promises of authentic mineral wells wellness. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to find them in a police report. A week after the incident, on a cloudy Saturday morning, I drove back to the Mineral Wells Historical Society. The squat brick building behind the county library had become my go-to for unraveling the town's secrets, its shelves a maze of dusty records that smelled of mildew and time. I'd been there before, digging into the Baker Hotel after Pamela's death, and the memory of Virginia Brown's ledger entry, room 714, still sent a chill through me. The VA incident felt connected, not just by the crazy water, but by the way it left me questioning what was real. The old man's words, "Not the water again, it's cold, so cold," echoed the sanitarium's history, and that brass sign, Millings Sanitarium, 1929, was a clue I couldn't ignore. Mrs. Carter, the volunteer with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous tic, was at the front desk, sorting papers with a precision that felt forced. She looked up as I walked in, her smile tight. "You're becoming a regular, officer," she said, her voice polite but guarded. I nodded, trying to keep it casual. "Heard the VA building used to be the Millings Sanitarium," I said. "Thought I'd see what's in the records." Her hand paused mid-sort, and she adjusted her glasses, a tell I'd come to recognize. "That's a heavy one," she said softly. "The sanitarium's not a story folks like to tell." She led me to a corner of the room where a shelf sagged under the weight of files labeled Millings Sanitarium, 1929 to 1955. "Be gentle," she said, her eyes lingering on me. "Some things don't take kindly to being disturbed." I settled into a creaky chair, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. The Historical Society was quiet, save for the hum of an ancient air conditioner, but I felt watched, like the records themselves were waiting to see how far I'd go. Mineral Wells had a way of making you feel like that. Its secrets weren't just hidden, they were guarded. The sanitarium's files were a mix of patient logs, treatment reports, and newspaper clippings, their edges brittle and yellowed. As I flipped through them, I pieced together a story that made the VA incident feel less like a random outburst and more like an echo of something much older. The Millings Sanitarium opened in 1929, the same year as the Baker Hotel, riding the wave of Mineral Wells fame as a health resort. The town's crazy water wells, with their mineral-rich promise of healing, had drawn thousands since the 1880s, curing everything from rheumatism to madness, or so the brochures claimed. The sanitarium was built for those whose ailments were in the mind: schizophrenia, hysteria, dementia, conditions that baffled doctors in an era when lobotomies were cutting edge. Patients came from across the South, lured by ads touting hydrotherapy and mineral-based regimens, the crazy water at the heart of it all. The sanitarium's whitewashed walls and manicured lawns gave it an air of hope, but the records told a darker truth. A 1931 treatment report described patients drinking gallons of mineral water daily, their diets supplemented with lithium-heavy doses from the wells. Others were submerged in hydrotherapy tanks, sometimes for hours, their bodies restrained to keep them still. The water, piped directly from the town's wells, was supposed to rebalance the nerves, but the results were mixed. Some patients improved, their families swearing by the water's miracles. Others didn't. A patient log from 1933 listed a woman, Margaret Tate, admitted for acute mania, who died after a week of water treatments, her death attributed to exhaustion. Another, a man named Henry Cole, was noted for violent outbursts after drinking the water, claiming a doctor told him to keep going. He was found dead in his room, a shard of glass in his hand, cause of death listed as self-inflicted. The parallels to the VA incident made my pulse quicken. The old man had stabbed himself, babbling about the water and treatments, like he was reliving something from the sanitarium's past. I found a newspaper clipping from 1935, half torn but legible, about a patient who attacked a nurse, screaming about cold water, and a man in a white coat who wouldn't leave him alone. The article called it delirium, but the nurse quit the next day, refusing to return. I thought of the figure I'd seen in the VA office, the fleeting image of a doctor in a white coat and mask, gone in a blink. Was it my imagination, or was the sanitarium's history bleeding into the present? I dug deeper, pulling out a maintenance log from the 1940s. It listed repairs to the hydrotherapy rooms, where leaks were a constant problem, the mineral water staining the walls with a chalky residue. The log noted unexplained temperature drops in the treatment wards, even in summer, and staff complaints of noises in empty rooms. One entry, dated 1948, read, "Ward B sealed after patient reports voices from water tanks. No source found." I thought of the whispers in the VA building, the cold air that didn't belong. The sanitarium had closed in 1955, its patients transferred to state asylums, but the building's new life as a VA office hadn't erased its past. Locals still whispered about it, Mrs. Carter had said. Stories of screams and figures in white coats that lingered long after the last patient left. I needed more than records, so I headed to the Rusty Nail, the dive bar where Pamela's friends had been before her death. It was a quiet afternoon, the jukebox playing a mournful country tune, a few regulars nursing beers. Roy, the bartender with the handlebar mustache, recognized me from my questions about the baker. "Heard about the VA," he said, wiping down the bar. "Sounds like old Millings is stirring again." I leaned in, keeping my voice low. "What do you know about it?" He glanced around, then spoke softly. "Folks who worked there, back when it was a sanitarium, said the water did things to people, made them see things, hear things. Some patients swore a doctor was telling them what to do, but there was no doctor there. After it closed, the stories kept going, janitors quitting, VA workers seeing shadows, and that water, it's still out there, bottled up like it's harmless." I asked about the crazy minerals company, the brand on the bottle I'd taken. Roy shrugged. They've been bottling it since the 20s. Same wells, same water. Tastes like metal, but people swear by it. Me, I stick to beer. He nodded toward an old man at the end of the bar, Clarence, who'd worked at the baker in the 50s. I bought him a drink and asked about the sanitarium. His hand shook as he spoke. "I had a cousin who worked there, cleaning wards in the 40s. Said the air was always cold, like something was breathing on you. One night, she saw a man in a white coat in the hydrotherapy room, standing by the tanks. Nobody was scheduled to be there. She quit the next day." I thought of my own vision, the doctor's coat in the VA office, and my mouth went dry. Back in my apartment, I pulled out the crazy water bottle and stared at it. On a whim, I cracked it open and took a sip. It tasted sharp, metallic, like licking a penny, and left a strange aftertaste, almost bitter. I set it down, my stomach uneasy. The old man's words, "Not the water again," rang in my ears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the water was more than a gimmick. The sanitarium had used it to cure patients, just as the Baker Hotel had used it to lure guests. Both places had left behind ghosts, Virginia Brown at the Baker, and now maybe a doctor at the sanitarium. Was the water a catalyst, carrying something from the town's past? Or was I chasing shadows, letting mineral well's strangeness get to me? The Historical Society had given me pieces of the puzzle, but they didn't fit yet. The sanitarium's history, with its failed treatments and ghostly rumors, was too close to the VA incident to be coincidence. Pamela's death, tied to Virginia Brown and the Baker, felt like part of the same story. A town built on hope, but steeped in loss, its wells tapping into something darker than minerals. I was a cop, trained to follow evidence, but Mineral Wells was teaching me that evidence wasn't always enough. Something was stirring in this town, and I was starting to think it wasn't done with me. 5 years in Mineral Wells, Texas, and I'm still trying to make sense of this place. It's a town that holds you tight, secrets woven into the streets, the wells, the very air you breathe. I've seen things here that would make you question your own eyes. Pamela Allen's body on the Baker Hotel steps, her naked form broken from a 7th floor fall, her last words about Virginia leading me to a ghost in room 714. Then, 4 months later, the Veterans Affairs incident, where an old man stabbed a letter opener through his hand, screaming about the water and "he's coming" in a building that was once the Millings Sanitarium. These aren't just cases. They're pieces of a puzzle I'm still putting together. One that's tied to the crazy water wells and a past that won't stay buried. The VA incident shook me, not just because of the old man's violence, but because of what it revealed about mineral wells. That building, with its cold air and whispers, wasn't just a government office. It was the Millings Sanitarium, built in 1929 to cure the mentally ill with the same crazy water that made the Baker Hotel famous. The bottle I took from the office, labeled Crazy Minerals Company, sits on my counter, a reminder of the old man's words. Not the water again. It's cold. So cold. My trip to the Historical Society uncovered a grim history. Patients dying in hydrotherapy tanks, seeing doctors who weren't there, hearing voices from the water. It's too close to Pamela's death, to Virginia Brown's ghost, to be coincidence. Mineral Wells is hiding something, and I'm caught in its web. Let's piece it together. The VA incident started with a 911 call about screams, leading me and my partner, James Orr, to a crowd outside the building. Inside, we found cold air, whispers in the walls, and an old man in green fatigues babbling about treatments and the water before stabbing himself. For a split second, I saw a man in a white doctor's coat, gone when I blinked. The paramedics called it dementia, but the brass sign, Millings Sanitarium, 1929, told a different story. The Historical Society records showed patients driven mad by crazy water treatments, some reporting visions like mine. It's like the sanitarium's past was reaching out, just as the Baker Hotels did with Pamela. What happened to that old man? The cop in me wants a clean answer. Maybe he was sick, his mind frayed by dementia, the crazy water just a trigger for delusions. The letter opener, the screams, the babbling. It could be a psychotic break, fueled by a lifetime of stress or a bad batch of meds. The whispers, bad acoustics, the cold air, a busted AC, the doctor's coat. My imagination, stressed from the Baker case and lack of sleep. It's a story that fits in a report, one that lets you clock out and go home. But then there's the other side, the part of me that saw a figure in the woods as a kid, pale and silent, and never told a soul. That part sees patterns. Pamela stripped naked, folded her clothes, and fell from the 7th floor, talking about Virginia. The old man stabbed himself, raving about the water and treatments in a building tied to the same wells. Both acted like they were answering a call, something beyond reason. The sanitarium's records, with their talk of ghostly doctors and voices in the water, matched too closely. And that crazy water bottle, it's not just a souvenir. The wells have been here since the 1880s, drawing the desperate, the dying, and maybe something else, something that lingers in the water, in the walls, in the town itself. Then there's James Orr's story, one he told me a few nights after the VA incident, when we were parked outside the station, the town quiet around us. James is a lifelong Mineral Wells resident, his family tied to the crazy water since the 1920s, when his great-grandmother came here hoping to cure her schizophrenia. She drank from the wells, settled in town, and died after giving birth to his grandmother in 1931. James keeps an old photo of her, standing by a well, her face serious but hopeful. He's a skeptic, quick to laugh off the town's ghost stories. But that night, he told me something that made my blood run cold. Years ago, before I joined the force, James responded to a call from an elderly woman named Ellie, who'd taken too many pills and feared she was dying. She was shaken but coherent, and poison control confirmed she'd be fine. As James was leaving, Ellie stopped him with a story. She said a young lady had told her to dump them all down my throat, and she'd taken a quarter of the bottle before snapping out of it. Curious, James asked who the lady was. Ellie pointed to her bedroom window and said, "The lady that watches me through the window." Thinking she was confused, James checked the bedroom. For a split second, he saw a face in the window, his great-grandmother's, the same face from that old photo, standing by the well. It was gone when he blinked, and a search found no one. Just a faint, musty smell in the room. He never told anyone, not until me. James's story hit me hard, not just because of his eeriness, but because it fit the pattern. A woman compelled to act against her will, a vision tied to the crazy water wells, a past that won't stay dead. It's like mineral wells is a magnet, pulling in the desperate and leaving behind echoes that don't fade. The Baker Hotel has Virginia Brown, luring Pamela to that window. The sanitarium has its doctor, maybe pushing the old man to stab himself. And now James, seeing his great-grandmother, a woman who drank the water and died here. Isn't the water itself carrying something from the wells? Or is it the town, built on broken hopes, trapping whatever lingers? I've got no answers, just questions that keep me up at night. I'm a cop, trained to chase facts, but Mineral Wells laughs at facts. The baker, the sanitarium, the wells, they're all part of something bigger, a puzzle I'm still piecing together. The crazy water is the thread running through it, from the bottles in the VA office to the wells that drew James's great-grandmother. I tried a sip of that bottle, and the metallic taste lingered like a warning. I haven't touched it since. So, what do you think? Was the old man just sick? Or was something in that sanitarium, something in the water, calling him? What about Pamela, or Ellie, or James's great-grandmother? Have you ever been to a place like this, where the air feels wrong, where the past feels closer than it should? Maybe you've got a story, something that happened late at night, something you've never told anyone. I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments, send me a message, whatever works. Because in Mineral Wells, stories are how we make sense of the things we can't explain. There's more to tell too. 5 years here, and I've got cases that'd make your hair stand on end. Shadows in alleys, voices on the radio that aren't dispatch. Figures in the rearview mirror that vanish when I turn. This town's not done with me, and I'm not done with it. So stick around, hit that subscribe button, keep listening, because the next story might be the one that cracks this puzzle wide open. For now, I'm parked across from the VA building, its windows dark, the night quiet, but I feel it watching, just like the baker, just like the wells. In Mineral Wells, the past is never dead. It's waiting, and I'm starting to think it's waiting for me.